Since the second season of Strange New Worlds aired, the Star Trek franchise has shrunk considerably. Discovery has been cancelled, Lower Decks has been cancelled, Prodigy has been cancelled. So now Strange New Worlds is the only Star Trek series currently ongoing, until Starfleet Academy starts next year. Luckily, Season 3 is just as good as Season 2, with great characters, inventive storylines, and movie-quality visuals. It's the best Star Trek has been in many years. The first episode, Harbinger Part 2, picks up where the Season 2 finale left off, with the Enterprise in pitched battle with the Gorn. It's basically all action, but it gives the whole cast something to do, and is a good way to reintroduce everyone. On the bridge there's Pike, Una and Uhura, and Pike immediately demonstrates his unique captaining style by smashing the Enterprise straight into one of the Gorn ships. Kirk was positively subdued by comparison. Spock and Chapel, meanwhile, are operating on Captain Batel, who was implanted with Gorn eggs last time, and for once the outcome is genuinely suspenseful, as we don't know if the character will survive, and it takes several attempts before they finally find a solution. Their relationship is a key dynamic for the show. We know that a few years down the line in the original series, Chapel has feelings for Spock, but he does not reciprocate. But that's still some ways down the line, so it'll be fun to see what permutations it takes before then. Another fun pairing is Scotty and Pelia. Martin Quinn is a fine addition to the cast as this younger, less experienced version of Scotty, and the student-teacher relationship he has with Pelia is an entertaining way of showing how he comes to evolve into the classic character. The last group is Ortegas, La'an, and Doctor and Benga, who have all been captured by the Gorn, and they have to fight their way off the ship, while La'an is dealing with flashbacks to her childhood, and Ortegas is severely injured, but insists on flying them out anyway. It's the only proper action scene we get, and it works well. The Gorn ship is a visceral organic entity, like something out of Lex or Farscape, and it makes for a convincing alien environment. In the end, Pike manages to send the Gorn back into hibernation by turning the Enterprise into a star. There are some extreme close-ups and bright lighting to show the changing environment. And finally, the Gorn are no longer a threat, at least until a few years down the line, when Kirk will have to fight one single-handed. But at least it's not nearly as scary as the ones from this generation. Wedding Bell Blues is a much lighter instalment, all about the characters rather than the action. 3 months have passed since episode 1, allowing both the crew and the characters to recuperate somewhat, although Ortega still has PTSD, which continues for most of the season. Her brother makes an appearance and immediately has a spark with Uhura. This is also setting up events for later in the season, including the documentary episode. And Batel is recovered and contemplating her future, and how her relationship with Pike will look going forward, with no decision made either way just yet. The main story revolves around Spock and Chapel, as she returns from her sabbatical, with her boyfriend, Roger Corby, possibly the descendant of the inventor of the trouser press. In the original series, he was her ex-fiancé, so we know how that ends up, but there's still plenty of room to develop it before then. Killian O'Sullivan doesn't look much like the Corby from the original series, but he's a charismatic actor and a complete contrast to Spock. So the dynamic between the three makes for some enjoyably awkward scenes. The twist comes when Spock encounters a mysterious character, played by Rhys Darby, who changes reality so that Spock is marrying Chapel and Corby is their best man, and later maid of honour. It's a classic Trek storyline of a godlike being messing with the crew, and it's got some quirky moments like Spock trapped under a glass or Corby turning into a dog. If anything, it could have done with more of this sort of thing. Most of the comedy comes with Spock desperately telling everyone that reality has changed, and everybody just assuming he's got cold feet. Plus the relationship between Spock and Corby as they are forced to team up while hating each other. It can't be easy to come up with new stories about Spock after 60 years, but somehow they keep doing it, and Ethan Peck's performance is as enjoyable as ever. At the end, Reese's parent comes to collect him, and is voiced by John Delancey of Q fame. This implies that he could be the same character as Q's child from Voyager, and he is also suspiciously similar to Trelane from the Squire of Gothos. Peter David's excellent novel Q Squared introduced the idea that Q and Trelane could be father and son, so it's good that it finally made it into canon, sadly only after his death. Ideally, the episode should have been dedicated to his memory. The episode looks fantastic as well, with a beautiful starbase set, which looks like it was created in the volume, and takes full advantage of the immersive 360-degree technology. Plus, all the female cast look stunning in their wedding outfits. And for those otherwise inclined, Spock has his shirt off in several scenes, so there's something for every taste. It's a really fun episode, and a great contrast to Part 1. Shuttle to Kenfori is basically Star Trek's answer to The Last of Us. So maybe they'll do Yellow Jackets next, have the Starfleet Academy kids crash on a planet and start eating each other. Turns out Battelle isn't nearly as cute as we were led to believe, and she's back at Death's Door again. So Pike joins Mbenga on a forbidden mission to a nightmare planet, which houses the only antidote. What could possibly go wrong? Well, just about everything, in fact. They make it down to the planet unscathed, only to find it's littered with half-eaten corpses, which is never a good sign. It turns out the inhabitants have turned into bloodthirsty zombies. And on top of that, a squad of Klingons arrive. So Pike and Mbenga are basically screwed. Actually, the whole zombie storyline kind of fades away once the superfluous Klingons have been dispatched, and the focus shifts to the Klingon commander, who turns out to be the daughter of the Klingon who Mbenga killed back in Season 2. She wants to kill him to reclaim her family's honour. Of course, he survives, but she ends up dead anyway. In other circumstances, it could have been a decent story, but they are literally surrounded by zombies at all times. You can't help thinking that maybe they could have put aside the differences until they were somewhere safe. Back on the Enterprise, it's all about Una's terrible new hairstyle, as well as Ortegas being increasingly reckless and putting the ship in danger just for the hell of it. There is a fun scene where the gravity gives out and everyone starts floating around. It's a shame that doesn't happen more often, as it looks really cool. In the end, everyone faces the consequences of their actions. Ortegas is suspended for 2 weeks, although you know that's not the end of her story. Pike and Battelle have a huge row about her keeping her condition from him. This is about the closest they've ever come to breaking up. And Mbenga has to confess his murder to Pike. But he's fine with it, so that's alright. It's probably the weakest episode of the season so far. There are some good scenes, but it feels like the zombie storyline never really gets going before the Klingons' vendetta with Mbenga takes over. Each of those stories would have benefited from more room to breathe, rather than being mashed together in the same episode. The Enterprise scenes are fun but forgettable, and the Battelle storyline is left on a bit of a cliffhanger. So all in all, not one of the best. After countless other parodies over the years, from Galaxy Quest to Black Mirror, it's about time Star Trek started parodying itself. The opening scene is hilarious, with Paul Wesley doing the broadest William Shatner impression he can, on a garish multicoloured set with a puppet alien. It's great stuff, and the perfect retort to anyone who complains that Strange New Worlds looks too different to the original series. It's another holodeck gone wrong story. It seems that every incarnation of Trek has to do one of these, though it does make sense that in this time period they're just trying out the technology, and it doesn't quite work yet. The scenes on the Enterprise give Scotty a chance to bond with Uhura. He's still very green and inexperienced, but hopefully they will show how he develops over the next couple of years. On the holodeck, it first appears to be an updated version of Picard's Dixon Hill adventures, with La'an doing her best hard-boiled private eye impression. But it soon becomes clear that the time period is the 1960s, and the murder suspects are the cast and crew of the Star Trek parody that we saw at the start. The cast all have a lot of fun playing different characters. Jess Bush gets to use her real Australian accent for the first time, and Anson Mount shows his range, playing a nervy Gene Roddenberry type. The whole murder mystery is a little complicated to follow, especially as you're still trying to figure out which character is playing who now. Amusingly, for British people of a certain age, the victim's name is Tony Hart, who was also a children's television presenter in the 1980s. So every time they deliver lines like, "Tony Hart was having an affair," it conjures up all kinds of inappropriate images. It's all based around the history of original Trek, with the show undergoing network interference and risking cancellation, and Uhura's character gives an impassioned speech about how generations around the world would unite about the show, which is an obvious reference to the legacy of the show in the real world. This is also a big episode for La'an and Spock, as they continue their dancing and eventually kiss. He was in love with Chapel only 2 weeks earlier, so it seems a bit sudden, but the actors do have a good chemistry, so it'll be interesting to see how it develops. Overall, it's a really fun episode, and it ends on a high note with the fake reel of outtakes. Definitely one of the highlights of the season. Through the Lens of Time has a great setup, with the crew investigating the ruins of an ancient civilization, with unimaginable secrets to be uncovered. Ultimately, it's really nothing we haven't seen before. There are some scary moments, but it's really all just teasing a sequel that we may or may not ever get to see. The opening is the strongest part, with new couple Spock and Lan going on the mission, along with Chapel and Corby, as well as potential couple Uhura and Ortega's brother. You can just imagine the kind of wacky rom-com shenanigans that could develop from that. But they don't, and everyone behaves professionally throughout. This is Star Trek and not the Orville. Also on the mission is new character Ensign Gabriel, who's popped up in a few episodes already. Here he takes centre stage, finally getting his chance to go on an away mission, only to be immediately possessed by an ancient alien parasite that burns out his eyeballs. It's a really gruesome image, with blood pouring out of his empty eye sockets, and not the sort of thing you would expect from Trek at all. When he returns to the Enterprise, Mbenga tries to regenerate his eyes. Good luck with that. Until Batel shows up, and her gone parts recognise him as a primal threat, whereupon the two of them have an impressive fight scene. Eventually Pelia shoots him, and gives a chilling speech about the existential nature of this new threat. It's locked up in the transporter buffers for now, but the ending hints it may not stay there. Meanwhile on the planet, there are all sorts of mind-bending puzzles for the trapped crew members to solve before they can find their way out of the alien structure. To be honest, I didn't entirely understand what was going on in these scenes, but they all make it out in the end, apart from the alien we've never seen before, and poor old Ensign Gabriel, who was not wearing a red shirt, but he might as well have been. The Sehlat Who Ate Its Tail is another strong episode, really leaning into the prequel nature of the show and giving us a key episode in the development of Kirk towards becoming a captain. There are rumours of a follow-up series starring Paul Wesley as Kirk, and from this evidence he can certainly carry a show, though I would prefer it to be set after the end of the original series rather than right before it, as that would seem to offer more scope for storylines and character development. But this episode is all about Kirk getting to command a ship for the first time. He is board census being a first officer under a Vulcan captain, ironically, and then he has to take over when his captain is severely injured. Fortunately, the Enterprise crew beam over, and he gets to have Spock, Chapel, Uhura and Scotty under his command for the first time. And we get to see how his command style evolves. He makes mistakes, but eventually he learns to listen to his crew and respect their expertise. He's still some way off from the original Kirk, but his relationships with Spock and Scotty are coming along nicely. And if the end game for this show is him becoming captain at the end of season 5, I'd say they're right on track. The villains are a mysterious group of scavengers in a massive ship, with technology and weapons way ahead of the Federation. It brings to mind the Doomsday Machine of the original series, or the first appearance of the Borg. We are led to believe it's a serious alien threat, so it's a big surprise when it turns out to be just an old Earth ship, and all the inhabitants are descendants of human colonists. I would have liked to know a lot more about how they developed over the intervening centuries, but sadly there's no room for further explanations as they all end up dead. It seems a bit of a waste, as there's surely more story to be told there. Meanwhile on the Enterprise we get some fun scenes, with Pelia using analogue technology to rewire the ship, and allow everyone to use rotary phones. Pelia is still a very mysterious character, and it's always intriguing to get another glimpse into her insanely long life. I was looking forward to this one. Normally the format-breaking episodes of Strange New Worlds are the highlights of the season. Some of its finest instalments are a break from the Trek norm. And the fake documentary format has been used to good effect in shows such as Babylon 5 and Stargate SG-1, so it can work in a sci-fi context. This episode, however, was not great, with a rather simplistic plot and an underwhelming resolution, so it's probably my least favourite of the season so far. They have been building up to this throughout the entire season, with Ortega's brother Umberto filming a documentary throughout. Now we get a full documentary-style episode with talking heads of the characters and cameras spying on their private conversations. The camera angles are quite disorienting. The bridge crew are filmed in extreme close-up from all kinds of unusual angles. It sets it apart from the norm, but not in a good way. The beginning asks some pertinent questions about whether the Federation is a warmongering galactic empire or a peaceful organisation of explorers. The answer to which seems to vary wildly depending on which episode or series you happen to be watching. Umberto's aggressive questioning seems rather naive and not really consistent with how he was previously established, and eventually it turns out that he was just angry about his sister being injured. And once he makes his peace with that, he's absolutely fine with everything Starfleet get up to. The happy feel-good conclusion feels rather unearned, almost like he's been brainwashed into buying into the Federation utopia, which is surely not the intention. The actual storyline is a typical Trek moral dilemma, raising the question of whether Starfleet ought to be helping an alien race win a war by using living weapons, only to be rendered moot when the weapon itself communicates with Uhura its desire to die in peace. Due to the nature of the episode, we never really see the crew debating the morals and ethics of the original mission, and it all feels rather truncated, coming in at just over 40 minutes. Whether there were additional scenes filmed but cut at the last minute, I don't know, but the final result is rather unsatisfying. Four and a Half Vulcans is another humour episode, and luckily most of it works. There are a few scenes where the comedy gets too broad, but most of it hits the right note, and it's a solid episode for the characters, moving them along even with half of them acting wildly different from most of it. The opening establishes the premise in amusing fashion, with Pike, Lan, Chapel and Uhura all turned into Vulcans for a mission that absolutely requires it for various convoluted reasons. You would almost think the whole situation was contrived merely to justify the premise, though it is really fun the way that the whole mission is over and done with in about 30 seconds, thanks to the efficiency of the Neo-Vulcan crew. After they all decide to stay in their new bodies, we get separate storylines for each of them. Pike is amusingly stiff in Vulcan form from his opening narration onwards, and his scenes are mostly comic relief. His transformation mainly affects Patel in her mission to get her job back, so she doesn't have to hang around the Enterprise like a spare part any longer. Melanie Scrofano is very watchable in the scene where she finally lets rip at her Vulcan boss. So if this is her final appearance for a while, at least she gets a decent send-off. Chapel's storyline is less important, breaking up with both Corby and Spock, only to take them both back at the end, and Uhura turns Umberto into her slave, as punishment for making such a terrible documentary the other week. But Lan's storyline is the most interesting, as she turns extremely aggressive and tries to start a war. Luckily, Kirk and Scotty are there to save the day. There is a nice moment when Pike and Lan realise that they both know about Romulans, but the main point was to show Kirk and Scotty starting to bond as friends, so that was good to see. Finally, Spock spends the whole episode feeling inferior due to being the only half-breed, and he gets roped in when Una confronts her Vulcan ex-Doug, played by Patton Oswalt. This is probably the weakest storyline. Una and Doug being unable to control themselves around each other is rather unbelievable, and Spock having to pretend to be Una's husband is just a tired sitcom trope. The post-credit outtakes with them are fun though. Terrarium has a classic Star Trek premise, with one of the crew stranded on a barren planet with a member of a usually hostile alien species who they have to work with to survive. It's a solid entry in the subgenre and has some fine acting by Melissa Navier, but the ending tying it back to an original series episode feels rather unnecessary. This is a big episode for Melissa Navier as Erica Ortegas. For most of it, she's the only character, or at least the only human, and she seizes the chance to carry an episode by herself. We see her systematically work through what she needs to survive. She's clearly highly trained and competent, but let's face it, there's probably a whole Starfleet Academy module on what to do in this situation, given the number of times it happens. The turning point comes when Ortegas discovers a Gorn has crashed on the same moon. This is her worst case scenario, and naturally at first she is extremely hostile, but she soon realises the Gorn is friendly and just wants to help her get rescued. They build a rudimentary translator, teach each other to play games, and only then do they think to try to repair the distress beacon, which they should probably have done first. Eventually they get rescued by setting fire to the atmosphere. You would expect the Gorn to sacrifice herself to save Ortegas, but instead Lan beams down and immediately shoots it on sight. From Ortegas' viewpoint, it's a tragic ending, but you can understand why Lan did it. Right before they beam up, a Metron appears, looking like an androgynous bald Vulcan, which is even sillier to how they looked in the original series. The whole situation was set up for them to study the human-Gorn conflict, as they would again in the original series episode Arena. It doesn't quite fit, as in that episode the Enterprise and Gorn ships accidentally strayed into Metron territory, but now it's all presented as part of a big long-term study, which doesn't entirely jibe with what we saw before. Still, that aside, it's a strong episode for Ortegas, finally getting the spotlight she deserves. The final episode of the season is not one of the best. It does give a tragic ending to one of the primary relationships, with some emotional scenes, but the story itself is rather weak, and it's a sequel to one of the less interesting episodes of the year, so it doesn't exactly end things on a high. It's a sequel to Through the Lens of Time, as we learn that the evil entity has escaped the transporter buffer and reconstituted itself on another world, where it's been worshipped as a god. The planet scenes are very impressive, with beautiful sets and costumes, but it feels like they could have done a lot more with them. We never really get a feeling for this whole civilization, it all just feels like background detail. It's really all building up to the final confrontation between Batel and the Vesta. It turns out that the cocktail of alien DNA in her system has somehow given her unique abilities that make her capable of defeating it. And there's some sort of weird prophecy business that Mbenga's somehow involved in as well. But anyway, when we get to the big final battle, it suddenly flashes forward to an extended sequence where we see Pike and Batel living out the rest of their lives in his cabin. If you've seen as much Star Trek as I have, you'll know this is not real. It's kind of an inner light deal, allowing them to live out a whole lifetime in seconds, and it means that Batel's not coming back. So it's pretty obvious what's happening, but it's still a very emotional scene. The two of them have a strong relationship that's been going since the pilot, and it's sad to see it end. Apart from the main plot, we also get to see Spock and Kirk mind melding for the first time, which bonds them a bit more, and they start to play 3D chess at the end, as they would do in the original series. If anything, they could really have devoted more time to that subplot. There is no cliffhanger ending this time, just the Enterprise heading out on further adventures, but Pike is clearly changed after losing Batel, so maybe he'll be more downbeat and thoughtful in the future. On the whole, this has been possibly the weakest season so far, with too many ship-based episodes and not enough alien worlds. The best parts have been the original series characters, slowly moving towards becoming a crew, and there's still room for them to bring in McCoy and Sulu and maybe Chekhov in the next 2 seasons. But the cast is already pretty large. Certainly Una and Uhura haven't had that much to do this year, so hopefully they can be more balanced next year. Thank you for watching. If you were subscribed to my Patreon, you could have read all these reviews as they went out weekly, but now that this video is out, I'll make them free for everybody to read. And if you enjoy my Star Trek reviews, keep an eye out in the coming weeks. I am thinking of reviewing Star Trek Enterprise. I haven't watched that show since it first aired, so it'll feel quite fresh. And the plan is to review them weekly on Patreon, and once I've finished each season, I'll do a video review on here. So plenty more Star Trek content to come. Look out for that, and I'll see you next time.